Thank you. Thank you. Magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. I'm going to read my presentation. I'll try to be as slow as possible. If I'm rushing my presentation, senyasan nyo lang ako. So I prepared some slides, pero the tendency is when you use those slides, they're going to be longer. So I'm not going to use them apart from one slide that just indicates the structure of the presentation for today. Okay, I'd like to begin by offering my sincere appreciation and thanks to Arena and the Third World Study Center for giving me an opportunity to present this study and to join all of you today. I suppose you are aware that in graduate school, students are allowed and in fact encouraged to present their studies in weekly work-in-progress, ripping apart sessions, ostensibly aimed at improving each other's work. In my 4 years of study, I presented this presentation in at least 4 sessions, 3 times at the LSC Destin Faculty and Staff and the Crisis Stage Research Center, and once at Queen Elizabeth House in Oxford at a conference sponsored by Francis Stewart's research team on conflict and poverty, where I received helpful advice from professors and peers. However, this is the first time I am presenting this thesis to an audience of Philippine and Mindanao scholars, of whom I have the greatest respect, some of whom have studied the region and its people far longer than I have. So I'm particularly eager to hear your thoughts and ideas about this study and its conclusions. I am also starting to rewrite this thesis for publication. So this session actually serves a self-interested desire to get as much feedback as possible to net. As they say, comments and suggestions before publication is an act of friendship. Comments and suggestions after publication is an act of aggression. Okay. This thesis is about understanding the nature of the political settlement existing in Muslim Mindanao, and how it shapes and is shaped by the resurgence of conflict and local strongman rule. I use the term political settlements to underscore the rigorous scholarship of institutional theorists such as Douglas North, Margaret Levy, Kathleen Telen, and the literature on rent-seeking and state-building as propounded by Mushtaq Khan, Jonathan Dijon, James Patchell, Nigel Roberts, and Francisco Gutierrez Sanin. Analytical references that shaped this year's 2011 World Development Report on conflict, security, and development. In short, political settlements do not only pertain to outcomes emerging from peace-building processes, but are also a reflection of the elite arrangements or bargains that determine the social contracts between the state and its citizens. In this thesis, I examine the reasons behind the rise and fall in political authority of rebel rulers in Muslim Mindanao. So the period of the study is actually that period before, during, and after the rise of the MNLF to the position of leadership in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. So yung mga taga-MILF dito, wag niyo akong titirahin ha, hindi ko kayo... The persistence of conflict in Southeast Asia has steered interest in the recent experience of insurgent movements in the region who have been thrust in the spotlight following successful political settlements. In places such as Mindanao in the Philippines, Aceh in Indonesia, and Timor-Leste, former rebels ascended to power after entering into peace agreements and participating in democratic elections to legitimize their rule. Bound by shared identities and historical grievances, they emphasized the primordial links that were critical in obtaining the support of their families, their clans, religious leaders, and their wider community. Their iconic struggles inspired popular allegiance and support from among marginalized groups in their communities, including local elites. However, in each of these cases, rebel rulers were almost immediately undermined by contesting claims of legitimacy and authority coming from local strongmen, political elites, and other insurgent groups that weakened popular allegiance to their rule, disrupted their authority, and in one case, particularly in Mindanao, ended their rule. What happened in Mindanao resonates in 40% of post-conflict settlements that reverted to violence within a decade after the signing of a peace agreement and the holding of elections to secure legitimacy. The peace and prosperity promised by legitimate authority was soon replaced by enduring violence and conflict, dashing people's hopes for a lasting peace. The challenges faced by rebel rulers in Mindanao soused doubt on our collective understanding of what political legitimacy entails, accentuated by the difficulty of ascertaining the real basis of political authority. Legitimacy is often dismissed as a smokescreen for the real powers of work, self-interest, coercion, power struggles, and the like. This explains why the process of identifying the basis of political legitimacy and uncovering the evidence to make causal conclusions is seen as a methodological minefield that has caused the subject to be understudied, leading scholars to conclude that the concept lacks explanatory and predictive power and is difficult to measure and operationalize. Yet, despite the conceptual dilemmas, legitimacy retains its salience as a default explanation for the stability and resilience of a regime. Political scientists, journalists, and other observers have tended to ask questions about legitimacy in periods of crisis and uncertainty. A recent study in Southeast Asia noted that it remains a sporadic issue in the region, and I quote, "When legitimacy has been most evidently in doubt, soldiers have often been near at hand either to support regimes or to replace them." Ito lang yung slide ko. Tapos na yung introduction, we go into the research. Okay, pero ba yung sila?
Okay.
Research question, gaps in the literature, my arguments, the references, the methodology, and the findings. Okay lang. Uwi na ako. The conditions obtaining before, during, and after the short period when politico-military actors were in command of subnational authority in Mindanao begs an important question that is the focus of this study. I ask why the foundations of legitimate domination that underpinned the accession of politico-military actors to power in Muslim Mindanao proved inadequate in consolidating their authority at the helm of the subnational state. This study is important because legitimacy is seen as a necessary ingredient in ensuring progress and peace. The study is significant in terms of assessing the salience of reigning explanations about the foundations of legitimate domination and authority in Muslim Mindanao, taking into account the wider literature on the Philippines and Southeast Asia. The inquiry requires a review of the role of families, clans, extended kinship networks in local constructions of legitimacy. Comparing this with the scholarship on the effects of legitimacy on bilineal or cognatic kinship networks, as noted in the literature, including studies of local headmen and chiefdoms, clientelism, men of prowess in the Philippines. The emergence of new warlord rulers that rule with impunity yet are able to sustain political authority begs a reassessment of the value of political legitimacy as a route to power, in contrast to the means that served local strongmen of Mindanao in the past. Finally, this study is relevant in the face of various subnational and national challenges from identity-based groups in Southeast Asia and elsewhere in the developing world, including places such as southern Thailand, Sulawesi and North Maluku in Indonesia, and in other conflict areas such as the DRC, Somalia, Sudan, and Afghanistan. The research deepens our understanding of how insurgent and rebel groups appealed to ordinary citizens and how their influence and following enabled them to gain formal authority, as well as the conditions that weaken their consolidation of that authority after they have acquired power. Apart from contributing to wider studies of rebellion and post-conflict settlements, the study's relevance is also underlined in the current peace process between the Philippine government and another armed insurgent group that is likely to hold the reins of autonomous subnational rule in Muslim Mindanao in the future. Let me begin with the gaps in the literature. Political legitimacy is defined as the right to rule or the ability to demand obedience from citizens who are duty-bound to follow the commands of leaders and states that possess moral authority, according to Weber. That description of Weber that says that legitimacy structures the relationships between state and society is still used as the starting point in most studies and analysis of political legitimacy, in particular its definition and how it evolves. Legitimacy requires an accredited moral claim that justifies the right to do specific and distinct things, enforce commands which cannot be countermanded, and to have a monopoly of legitimate enforcement. Now, the challenge of enforcing commands is central to political legitimacy construction in an era where armed challenges to the state continue to resonate. This is underlined by the literature on legitimacy in post-conflict situations. The phenomenon faced by rebel leaders in Mindanao is not new, and there is ample evidence indicating that widespread violence can occur and should in fact be anticipated at the stage when a formal peace is secured and reconstruction begins. In fact, a recent study by Jeremy Weinstein, 2008, on the politics of insurgent violence, anticipated the problem of legitimate enforcement faced by the rebels themselves, even before they laid claim to state power. He described how resurgent violence in areas controlled by rebel groups pointed to the crucial role of rebel organizational structures and endowments in responding to shifting political conditions and changing expectations. The certainty of a violent conflict aftermath explains why several studies of state crisis and failure have criticized the optimism of international development actors over the supposed economic and political dividends that a liberal peace can bring, and how the introduction of formal democratic processes such as elections, decentralization, autonomy, and devolution can actually weaken rather than strengthen political support for post-conflict regimes. The gap in the literature lies in explaining how political legitimacy figures in all of this. How are outbreaks of violence and instability associated with the way in which local strong men compelled obedience, nurtured the allegiance of local citizens, and neutralized armed and unarmed challengers to their authority? These questions pose the weaknesses and inadequacies in most studies of political legitimacy that often focus on the state's adherence to a checklist of norms and characteristics that are supposed to bestow the normative requisites of legitimacy. An even more recent study by Gillig reflects this ideal approach. He studies legitimacy by measuring indicators such as elite corruption, boycotting in elections, civil disobedience, falling tax collections, draft dodging, secession movements, and the spread of crime. Behavioral indicators indeed are useful in anticipating people's perceptions over whom to support and whom to reject, but they fail to explain how these perceptions came about. This study, therefore, focuses not on the normative requisites, but explains how this came about. It trains the spotlight at the subnational level through an analysis of the institutional and socio-economic conditions and considerations that weigh heaviest among citizens when they make decisions over whom to support in Muslim Mindanao. The study presents demonstrable evidence about the political legitimacy of politico-military rulers or the observed sources of obedience and support for their rule, X, before examining the demonstrable signs about the loss of obedience and support for their authority, Y. Observations about the transition from X to Y enables an analysis of the contextual factors that can explain the loss of power and authority. It also sheds light on the determinants of political legitimacy at various levels and calls attention to the underlying institutions that shape people's perceptions of legitimacy and how some symbols and processes used to claim legitimacy at the center often run counter to the language and the construction of legitimacy at the local level. A subnational study of Muslim Mindanao can reveal and explain how the power of superordinate power brokers have changed and how local strongmen have adapted to the challenges posed by a newly emerging group of violent political entrepreneurs. They help to uncover why legitimate self-rule failed to deliver a lasting peace, or to borrow from John Seidel, help unravel how claims of legitimacy can become dangerously illegitimate. My argument, my thesis. I highlight the role of resilient informal institutions that accompanied strongman rule that shape perceptions of legitimacy and the ways in which local strongmen used and manipulated these institutions to sustain their authority. By combining an analysis of local strongmen with the evolution of formal and informal institutions, I expose the inadequacy of reigning explanations that link political authority purely to the capabilities of local strongmen on the one hand, and the flaws in institutional explanations that are divorced from political agency on the other. I propose that political legitimacy is actually the outcome of a bargaining process between political agents at various levels that leads to institutional choices mediated and accepted by society. These choices underline the multiple institutions arising from clan networks, Islamic organizations, and the state that are harnessed to secure support from local elites and allegiance from local citizens. My argument proceeds from three premises. One, that legitimacy is the product of choices over a range of formal and informal institutions. Two, that these choices are shaped by politico-economic bargaining among and between elites and the political agents of these institutions at various levels. And three, that the outcomes of these bargains need to be accepted by society. In short, determining political legitimacy requires an understanding of how elite bargains are created and embedded in the social contracts between rulers and citizens. The study demonstrates how the bargaining process comes about by showing the ways in which rulers and subjects navigated a set of rival institutions and how they interacted with the agents of these institutions. In the case of Muslim Mindanao, these include local strongmen who are leaders or headmen of clans and extended kinship networks, politico-military rulers, national and local elites, and Islamic clerics, scholars, and missionaries. National and regional political elites entered into similar bargains with local elites at various levels in exchange for allegiance and support. The study proposes further that in the particular case of Muslim Mindanao, the ruler who guarantees access to protection in the pursuit of livelihoods with minimal interference from the state stands the best chance of generating the trust and allegiance of their citizens and subjects. The implications are startling. Political legitimacy, therefore, is not always about building a strong state, but can also be about weakening the state. Legitimacy may be less about building peace and more about demonstrating an ability to inflict violence. I use three analytical references in this study. First, I look at the politico-economic foundations of legitimacy construction, which is the most understudied aspect of legitimacy. Scholars have pointed to at least 4 elements of legitimacy, including consent of the governed, proper use of power, and conformity with the established rules for acquiring power, proper and effective use of power, shared norms and values, and consent of the governed. Yet the dominant discourse on political legitimacy in Muslim societies, for example, sees legitimacy as a function of tribal, ethnic, or religious traditions that operate simultaneously, such as in the case of Islamic societies that have to account for shared ethnic and communal experiences, Islamic Sharia law, and the evolving political Islam. Studies of Islam and political legitimacy have shown how Muslim states adopted Islamic symbols and lexicon to manifest the inseparability of Islam, national identity, and secular laws using these symbols. Other scholars have suggested that nationalism is as important as ethnicity and shared values, citing the case of China and Taiwan. States can alter perceptions of legitimacy according to their political agenda through instrumentalist calls for separatism and nationalism. Finally, the institutional justifications for legitimate authority can even be imposed through a process of invention, as argued by Eric Hobsbawm and Terence Ranger. Despite their nuances, all of these arguments, however, underscored the social, cultural, and political makeup of society, yet de-emphasized its economic aspects, even though Weber himself argued that successful legitimacy requires looking at the economic conditions of society. Second, institutional multiplicity and political agency. I examine how political legitimacy shapes and is shaped by rival institutional systems, and how the agents of these institutions interact with each other, which is central to explaining how legitimacy is crucial in the face of sustaining fragile political power and authority. Scholars have cited the differences in equating legitimacy with democratic institutions. Studies have pointed out that formal democratization actually strengthens ethnic clientelism, can bring about renewed intervention and challenges to the state. Democratization can lock in divisive identities and increase distrust. Other scholars have decried the tendency to prescribe a one-size-fits-all type of political legitimacy using elections, transparency, and the rule of law. The tendency to prescribe democratic institutions is worsened by the view that institutions emerge in a complementary manner. Writing on the evolution of institutions, one of the authors that inspired this work was Kathleen Tellem, who criticized the notion that rule systems evolve in a compatible way, or as integrated wholes and mutually reinforcing. She stresses the need to examine how institutions are sustained and change over time, and provides a prism for understanding institutional evolution as the inevitable outcome of political agents who either complement or collide with each other. Here is an example. A Muslim cleric in Mindanao shares the difficulties of navigating multiple institutions in a particular dilemma he faced when his son accidentally crashed into a pedestrian while driving his motorcycle in Muslim Mindanao. And I quote, "It was late afternoon on a Friday when I was told that my eldest son had an accident. He had been arrested by local policemen because he had bumped a vendor with his motorcycle. I could not take him out of jail because the police told me he had to face an inquest fiscal the following Monday, which meant he would be in jail for 3 nights and 4 days. But neither could I permit him to be seen as having been jailed because that would have caused my family and my clan some embarrassment. To save face, I had to bribe the jail guards into letting him stay and sleep in another room of the municipal hall, far from the view of the other inmates and visitors. The next Monday, we faced the fiscal and he was granted bail. But before we left, we had to visit the family of the victim to pay compensation because a Muslim must pay for any injury as cost. In short, I had to pay fianza twice. The ulama's dilemma originates from at least three rival institutions that he needed to deal with. The first had to do with clan institutions that needed to be followed to avoid losing face. The second required following civil and criminal law statutes imposed by the state. The third required negotiating with the victim's family to uphold Sharia's rules on compensation for injury. To deal with all three, he had to engage in bribery, which was acceptable and reasonable according to clan rules, but illegal in terms of the state and immoral according to Islam. The institutions and the political agency of the clan clearly trumped constitutional rules and Sharia law in this case. The ulama's dilemma reflects the manner in which the concept of institutional multiplicity operates and provides an explanation of how institutions actually evolve, underlining the flaw in seeing multiple rule systems as a realm of cooperating and mutually reinforcing institutions with relations to each other in some sort of matrix, as the Nobel Prize winner Douglas North asserts. In the case of Muslim Mindanao, the post-conflict processes were geared towards disarming and integrating ex-combatants into the state's security force, the holding of democratic elections, and the establishment of a subnational assembly and a regional devolved authority as the basis for legitimacy. The need to quickly implement a liberal peace in Mindanao acquired the status of a North Star, fixed and immutable despite the variations in the specific historical context of local institutions. This played an important role in the consequent weakening of the legitimacy and authority of Nur Miswari and the MNLF. The study shows that local strongmen in Mindanao had to navigate the range of formal and informal rule systems to influence individual and collective decision-making processes. Strongmen who rule with impunity and are extremely personalistic, such as Ampatuan, do so at their own peril. The study exposed the residual yet dynamic effects of traditional rule systems that evolved from segmentary societies, personalistic relations, fluctuating alliance networks, and indigenous ideas of power, which we have learned in the past. These things were written about by scholars such as Hortowitz, Kiefer, Juncker, Anderson. Indeed, most people in Muslim Mindanao remain dependent on clan institutions and dynamics to enhance their welfare, gain access to power, or deflect violence and provide security to their families. Finally, the third reference, elite bargains. The concept of inclusive political settlements offers the analytical bridge that I believe could link the various formulations of how legitimacy can lead to resilient political authority. This framework of inclusive political settlements inserts the concept of elite bargains or elite arrangements using Bayard's famous tract on the politics of the belly in determining legitimacy. It highlights the capacity of the state to enter into bargains and to constantly shift perceptions, definitions, and its standards of legitimacy. It signifies the mutually beneficial arrangements between the state and elites in fostering access to rents and political stability. It examines the evolution of a similar arrangement in Muslim Mindanao, the nature of the political consensus between the central Philippine state and local powerful elites and politicians in Muslim Mindanao, and how that consensus shaped the spread of violence and the expansion of an illegal economy dominated by clan institutions. The study explores the decentralization, the near total decentralization of violence in Muslim Mindanao as a common agenda between the national and the local state in Mindanao, and its consequences in terms of the ability to provide protection to all citizens. It trains the spotlight on the trade-offs that have been struck between national and local states in terms of financial, political, and electoral support to the incumbent administration, referring to Gloria. No. Gusto ko lang liwanagin kay Joey. In exchange for decentralized coercion and the maintenance of a vast illegal economy. The notion of elite bargains and inclusive political settlements accentuate the politico-economic elements that underpin the right to rule. It strengthens the arguments in the study that proposes a notion of legitimacy that is a result of a bargaining process over economic and political interests. To sum up the references, political legitimacy can be viewed as the right to rule articulated through a process of elite bargaining that leads to inclusive political settlements that produce resilient political authority. Methodology. Maiksi na lang. 2 minutes? 10 minutes. Bibilisan ko na lang. While studies of conflict, rebellion, and the broader issue of state-society relations in Muslim Mindanao are mostly based on historical accounts, ethnographic narratives, and participant observation, and draw heavily on in-depth interviews and community-level case studies. There are few quantitative studies that identify trends across large populations or that enable data collection that is untainted by the particularities of the context in which it is described. While this study relied heavily on generating qualitative data, in 2004 survey conducted by the Asia Foundation, thank you Stephen, of inter and intra-clan violence and predisposition to violence, provided the quantitative data that I triangulate with permission from the authors and the owner. The quantitative data tests the association between relevant variables such as clan membership and predisposition to violence. However, as often the case in quantitative methods, the direction of causality is difficult to impute in the absence of time series data. To address this gap, I use qualitative means such as life histories, in-depth interviews, and focus group discussions to improve inferential leverage. I generated both subnational and micro-level data that was divided into 3 parts. The first part is a horizontal and vertical analysis of rival and overlapping institutions, where I employ life histories to decipher the language of legitimacy. The life histories were generated through a hybrid biographical approach that combines inductive and deductive methods. The approach focuses on the changes in people's beliefs and perceptions and the context behind those changes. The life histories were supplemented by archival research and semi-structured interviews of other key respondents to enable me to push and probe deeper into experiences pertaining to clan relations, education, socialization, and occupation. A total of 88 semi-structured in-depth interviews totaling more than 120 hours of recorded information were generated. For archival material, the U.S. Library of Congress in Washington yielded valuable material that enabled the author to trace the origins of Mindanao's informal economy. The stepwise process employed in the biographical approach guards against what Telen was saying about not looking at institutions as complementary to each other. The first part of this research offered a route to analyze the various elite groups and coalitions of power. The second part entailed the collection of data through a micro-level analysis of 2 extreme cases, 2 municipalities within the ARMM that exhibited divergent outcomes. I used the method employed by the economist John Paul Fagay in his study of decentralization in Latin America, Statis Caliva's study of political economy, and the rational choice theorist Robert Bates in his studies of East and Sub-Saharan Africa. The extreme case studies are the municipality of Upi, formerly called North Upi, where economic growth has been significant and where peace has been maintained, and the municipality of Buldon, where unemployment and poverty was increasing and where violence was as prevalent as the period prior to the signing of the 96 Peace Agreement. Both municipalities are part of the province of Maguindanao. Okay, findings. By the way, we have copies, we have 20 copies of the case study that you can use. You don't have to take note, they'll be distributed. Just to end, conclusions of the study. The study showed how politico-military rulers originally grounded their legitimacy in the conditions of discrimination and exclusion that led to the secessionist struggle in the late 60s, and how that struggle was framed along multiple institutions, including those of the Klan and Islam. Insurgent leaders would later subscribe to constitutional and democratic rules and adhere to the political agents of devolution and good governance when they agreed to participate in local elections and were elected to leading positions in the ARMM. They should have been aware that they were partaking of the same structures of economic and political power that had previously been occupied by local strongmen and warlords. Their experiences as a rebel organization should have sensitized them to the need to appeal to both the rules that circumscribed economic and political authority and the need to draw upon the same strategies and capacities that had served strongman rule so well. These required the flexibility and innovation that could enable bargains with local elites and concessions to other strongmen and politico-military groups. Instead, they failed to see how the legitimization of both the regime and the individual claimants to authority involved certain concessions and constraints upon their own domination and exercise of power. Quoting Seidel. First lesson. It is clear that the loss of legitimacy and authority by Miswari and other politico-military actors were due to their failure to grasp the nature of the political settlement between local elites, between local and national elites, and between local rulers and citizens that underpin the structures of economic and political power in Muslim Mindanao. Variations in subnational rule between traditional clans, politico-military rulers, and warlord clans demonstrated how the process of mediating these bargains is a continuous process that requires constant appeals to multiple institutions. Before one can pose a challenge to an incumbent ruler, one has to demonstrate an ability to generate financial resources to pay for votes, inflict violence, and provide protection. The latter can only be secured by harnessing the strategies of local strongmen and strengthening alliances with clan institutions and organizations. Second, politico-military rulers failed to recognize the resilience of clan institutions and dynamics. The experiences of politico-military rulers were inadequate to constantly teach them to constantly appeal to clan institutions or to build alliances with local strongmen and elites, which they had painstakingly conducted during the long years of struggle. The outbreak of war in 2000 and the spike in clan violence underscored the absence of a political settlement that included the clans and rival insurgent groups under Miswari, which in turn undermined the social contracts with citizens in the ARMM that promised a lasting peace and diminished economic and political predation when he assumed power. Third, politico-military leaders paid little attention to clan disputes that the same insurgents actually resolved actively during their long years of struggle, and which they now ignored, resulting in the quick deterioration in security that allowed local strongmen and other insurgent groups to step into the breach. In conditions rife with subnational armed challenges and clan violence, politico-military actors who were engaged in conflict were lured to the negotiating table by the offer to govern autonomous and devolved subnational states in exchange for peace. One data unknown to all was the fact that the elections in the ARMM in 1996 were held in October. But Nur Miswari filed the certificate of candidacy in September 1996, for 1 month before a peace agreement was actually signed between the government and the MDLF. Formal peace processes only address the vertical violence between insurgents and the state, while horizontal conflict between families, clans, and tribes were largely ignored. Politico-military rulers could have paid more attention and priority to settling horizontal disputes, especially since the processes required to resolve these types of violence provided an opportunity to demonstrate strongman skills and their respect for clan institutions. 4. The strategies of politico-military rulers were hinged upon a bid to overturn the dominance of local strongmen and political clans, an agenda that was inherently flawed because the structured discourse and practice of subnational rule could not be divorced from the practice inherent in clan institutions or the dynamics of the clan, especially since the members of their own rebel organizations maintained their loyalty to local strongmen and clan institutions. It seems counterintuitive for leaders of a politico-military movement who drew upon the resources and their alliances with clan leaders during their long struggle for power to neglect, ignore, or undermine the same powers at work in the region once they were in a position of power. Their approach was based on faulty expectations of support and reciprocity from national political elites, and the assumption that these national elites would discard their alliances with local strongmen and continue to accord the same recognition and authority to former insurgents as they had to clan rulers when these insurgents no longer commanded the same firepower which they had during the negotiations. By claiming formal political authority as governor of the ARMM, Miswari and his fellows gave up their ability to threaten peace and their ability to provide protection within the conditions of insecurity and conflict that characterized Mindanao. Miswari was later removed from the political arena by the same constitutional rules that he hastily embraced to bolster his legitimacy and acquire political authority. Rebel rulers and even the donor community, number 7. Rebel rulers and even the donor community had few clues about how Mindanao's informal economy had been transformed into a major site of resource mobilization, enabling local strongmen and other clan leaders who were well-positioned in Mindanao's shadow economy to achieve qualitatively new heights of power. The illegal economies of Mindanao grew because of the expedient measures during the U.S. colonial period that were reproduced over time. Clan institutions thrived in the shadow economy and enabled local strongmen to look after elite interests and the jobs and livelihoods of local citizens. Most of all, Mindanao's shadow economy enabled clans to regulate conflict, especially over land, through informal land markets. The land issue was a frequent source of clan violence up to today, especially, and resolving land disputes was so strategic to delivering peace and stability in the region, and in strengthening property rights that was often avoided, that was an important condition for investors to enter the region. The 1996 final peace agreement neglected this critical source of violent conflict when it failed to mention any significant provision for agrarian issues in the region. The study reveals a neglected aspect of the region's economic development. The reason why an exclusionary political settlement was able to thrive for so long was because incomes and profits in Muslim Mindanao depended considerably on a resilient underground economy that enabled local clans and their followers to find jobs and engage in livelihoods with very little taxation and regulation from the state. The informal economy was supplemented by access to increasing portions of internal revenue allotments after decentralization in the early 90s that created a soft budget constraint for rulers who did not see the need to strengthen local sources of revenue. Allowing the existence of Mindanao's shadow economy became part of the elite bargain and the social contract between local rulers and their citizens with the central, including the colonial state. Contributions to the theory and practice of legitimacy. In the introduction, I proposed that legitimacy was achieved through a bargaining process at various levels. I argued that the concept of inclusive political settlements offered an analytical bridge to link the various formulations. This framework allowed me to propose the following. First, the struggle of politico-military actors for legitimacy should combine an appeal to multiple institutions and their agents on the one hand, and the skills and practices of local strongman rule on the other. Politico-military rulers can indeed anchor their legitimacy in an array of institutions. The ability of rulers to mediate between the political agents enabled them to sustain their legitimacy. This study showed that clan institutions trumped other sources of legitimacy because their agents were most capable of providing protection and the means to survive for ordinary citizens in communities embedded in conditions of poverty, economic informality, conflict, and displacement. 2. Agentless versions about the effects of institutions on political legitimacy are as flawed as institutionless explanations of strongman rule. Legitimate authority requires an understanding of the local institutional foundations from which legitimacy involves, but also the actions and practices of local strongman rule. In the case of Muslim Mindanao, clan institutions trumped religious and democratic institutions over long periods, largely for two reasons. First, because those rulers who anchored their legitimacy on these institutions were able to build political authority, support elite interests, and provide the means for economic survival. Second, because rulers who anchored their legitimacy in clan institutions had the prowess and the resources to provide protection. 3. The study showed that the pursuit of political legitimacy in conflict-affected subnational contexts is inextricably linked to the ability of competing organizations to use violence and gain political authority and power and provide protection to elites. Bibilisan ko na. 4. Economic performance contributes to enhancing political legitimacy, and it does underlie local perceptions about the proper use of power. Political legitimacy is further enhanced when rulers secure and protect a significant underground economy that often provides the only means for economic survival and social support for local communities. Specific to Muslim Mindanao, the evolution of the region's political economy can no longer be explained by rebel rulers within their instrumentalist discourse and framework of a Bangsamoro homeland seized by colonial and foreign interests and the northern Filipino settlers, as they were now themselves in possession of political authority and the resources that came with it. The continued underdevelopment of the region could only be traced to the shifting balance of economic and political power within Bangsamoro society itself. Between those who prospered from the war and the resulting peace versus those who did not benefit, in particular the many who remain impoverished and vulnerable within the region. 5. Political legitimacy loses traction in conditions of extreme personalistic rule, which in turn leads to fragile political authority. This study provided the clearest and strongest evidence of the vulnerability of extreme personalistic rule, like Ampatuan, in contrast to the resilience of local rulers who entered into bargains with the regional political authority and other clans. maintaining these bargains as an essential part of their contract. Mayor Ramon Piang of UP strengthened the municipal government, improved the delivery of state services, created conducive conditions for economic growth, and ensured peaceful conditions in UP. He used his alliance with Ampatuan to secure funds to deliver benefits for local citizens. In exchange, the elite bargain between Piang and Ampatuan was that Ampatuan could send all of his visitors from international development agencies and other funders to UP to demonstrate UP as a showcase for development. Mayor Fatima Ruth Aratok Tumawis did not collect taxes, targeted most services and financial favors to her clan members while demolishing armed challenges from competitors. She used Ampatuan as a source of financial weapons and favors that could sustain her clan's power. In exchange, she delivered the votes to the Ampatuan clan in the Buldon, Barira, and Matanog corridor in Maguindanao. She and her husband, the late Alex Tumawis. They claimed political legitimacy. Both of them were seen as legitimate. They had authority, but they approached, they developed, they gained political legitimacy through opposite routes, leading to inclusive outcomes in UP and exclusionary outcomes in Buldon. Ramon Piang was re-elected as vice mayor after 3 uninterrupted terms as mayor of UP and now sits in the negotiating panel of the government with the MILF. Meanwhile, Fatima Ruth Aratok Tumawis was also re-elected as mayor in the May 2010 elections, but the political assassination of her husband, Alex Tumawis, soon after the elections, leaves her extremely vulnerable and has resulted in displacement and renewed instability in Buldon. The case studies reveal how legitimacy becomes fragile or collapses when political authority tramples upon multiple institutions and does not produce an inclusive settlement. The November 2009 Maguindanao massacre, attributed to the Ampatuan clan, revealed the clan religious and constitutional institutions that were demolished by the single act of violence. Political observers would describe the massacre as an aberration in a culture with embedded institutional restraints against such behavior. The Quran prohibited attacks on innocent civilians, especially Muslim women. Clan institutions prevented violent retribution against other clans who were erstwhile allies, and in the absence of clear injustices. Law enforcers were not supposed to act as executioners in brazen attacks against civilians. These institutional violence played an important role in the political isolation of the Ampatuan clan in Mindanao and across the Philippines. The study illustrates the shifting foundations of legitimacy and authority before and after Ms. Wari's rise to power. Before the ARMM was established, subnational rulers had no regional vehicle to exercise their authority. Ali Di Maporo appealed to clan institutions, developed close ties with the Marcos regime by initially delivering the vote banks of northern and central Mindanao to the dictator, and later by becoming the martial law overseer in Muslim Mindanao and the chief partner of the military in combating the secessionist rebels. When the ARMM was established, its first set of rulers came from traditional clans. They gave life to the unfulfilled promise of autonomous self-rule. When Ms. Wari became governor, he was seen as a legitimate voice of the Bangsamoro people. His discourse of peace and development underscored people's expectations that he could tame rebel and clan violence and deliver developmental progress. He was also the first ruler to openly challenge the authority and rule of the clans, but his failure to stem the violence took their toll on his legitimacy and authority. Now contrast the above to the rise of Ampatuan, and one sees the evolution of a new type of ruler who can jettison the institutions and alliances that allowed his rise to power, revealing the changed dynamic between local and subnational, and between subnational and national political elites, effectively a changed political settlement. Those changes included the decentralization of both economic and political powers, the exponential expansion of pernicious and deadly aspects of Mindanao shadow economy, especially in drugs, and the regional consolidation of both banks that made local rulers more powerful and national political elites more beholden to them. These powers underline the trade-offs between national and local states in terms of political and electoral support to the government in exchange for decentralized coercion and the maintenance of a vast illegal economy. In short, political legitimacy was discarded to give rise to the rise of newfound political entrepreneurs. Political impunity and warlord rule did not survive the trampling of multiple institutions. As successful as the warlord Ampatuan was at the regional level, he ultimately crashed by following in the extreme what the Tumawis clan did locally. The analysis, last paragraph, the analysis of the experience of Muslim Mindanao provides a lens that can be usefully applied to understand the prospects for creating legitimate and autonomous rule in other subnational states plagued by conflict. Analyzing the array of institutions and how they shape perceptions of legitimacy and authority will be crucial in places such as Aceh, North Maluku, Sulawesi, or Patani in southern Thailand, where insurgent challenges and persistent community-level violence continue to draw upon traditional, local, and informal institutions that can provide more security and certainty to individuals at the subnational level than those foisted by the state. Salamat.